it goes a lot deeper than simply rich people in government who don't give a f. There is a problem of our economic institutions are intellectually bankrupt. And that sounds extreme, but listen, I've got a degree from LSE, I've got a degree from Oxford, I've been in think tanks, I've been in the city, I've been in economics for 18 years now, in many different spaces. My honest opinion is that economics is intellectually bankrupt as a discipline. I got a question on Twitter the other week. Very simple question. Why don't governments tax the rich? And I think that's a really interesting question. And it's actually, I think to think about it and to answer is quite interesting. So before I start, I should say, you know, I'm not a politician. I don't know many politicians very closely, okay? So we kind of make some assumptions about what they're working with. But, you know, I often say when I'm asked this question, I say, well, Rishi Sunak, extremely, extremely wealthy. You know, I can't emphasize how wealthy he is. Unbelievably richer than me, unbelievably richer than probably anybody watching. His father-in-law was one of the richest men in the world. He's super, 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 super rich, right? So this is the guy in charge of making the decision, should we tax the rich? So he's probably not going to make it, right? And then the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, I think he's worth something like, I don't know, 10, 15 million pounds. Also very, very wealthy man. Again, much, much richer than me. He's probably unlikely to do it, right? Before that, Boris Johnson, he's going to make millions of pounds. He already has probably since leaving office. David Cameron made 10 million pounds from Greensill, you know, within a year of leaving office, right? So, and Tony Blair, he must be worth what? I don't know, 50 million, 100 million. These guys are super rich, right? So if the people you put in charge are very rich or about to become very rich, you can see there's a pretty obvious conflict of interest there in dealing with policies such as should we tax the rich or the very rich more, right? Because they're basically deciding the policies that will apply to them, to themselves, right? So I think that definitely plays a part. But I think that there is actually something deeper going on, which is important, and we should discuss that. Because within a couple of years, we will probably have a Labour government in this country. And again, you know, you could point the same charge at the Labour leadership. You could say the Labour leadership is not as rich as the Conservative leadership, and their donors are not as rich as the Conservative donors. But there still are very many relatively wealthy people in that party, and when they leave office, you know, Tony Blair, for example, became very rich. So, you know, we could point the same thing at them. But there's lots of countries in the world, and there's lots of governments, and we have some governments which are sort of left-leaning, and in general, they haven't implemented bigger taxes on the rich. So that raises a question about why. And I think what is happening is that politicians themselves generally are not economists, and they're very rarely expert economists. So political parties, they tend to basically go and ask economists, you know, what should we do? What should we do? And I think the truth is, at the moment, if you were to ask most sort of average run-of-the-mill economists, you know, not traders, people who have gone to work in civil service or in government or in think tanks, what do you think we should do? Tax the rich more is still a relatively niche opinion, right, within economics. And we have to address the question about basically why that is. Why is that? And I think to understand that, you have to understand what is happening in the universities, basically, economics. So economics as it is taught nowadays at most of the most prestigious universities is an extremely mathematical subject. Very, 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 very mathematical. If you want to do well in it, and we're talking about macroeconomics here, so we're talking about the economies of countries. If you want to do well in it, realistically, the main thing that you have to be able to do is to memorize algebra. So from 2017 to 2019, I did a 2-year economics master at Oxford. The first year of that course, we did a macroeconomics module. The exam was 3 hours. And the first 2 hours is basically just the regurgitation of memorized algebra. That's basically all it is. And then the last 1 hour is essay questions, but everybody knows that everybody gets the same score for the essay questions anyway. So really, when these kids go into these university courses, they are hard. The first thing I'll say is they are hard. So sometimes I maybe give the impression that economists are stupid, but the truth is, to get an economics degree is difficult. You need to memorize a lot of algebra, and you need to have some kind of understanding of the algebra and how it works, how to manipulate it, right? It's not easy. But imagine you have gone into an economics degree, you've got a big exam coming up, you've got a ton of algebra to memorize. You are going to spend all of your time memorizing the algebra, right? So what these guys get is they get given models which the theoretical complexity is not actually that much. They're not particularly complex in terms of theory, in terms of ideas, but they're very complex in terms of algebra. And I think by the time you've come through you've got your master's, you've got your PhD, you will have spent, nearly a decade doing very, 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 very complicated algebra about pretty theoretically simplistic ideas. And by the end of that, you've spent so long working on the algebra and so little thinking about the ideas that you start to subconsciously completely accept the ideas. It's almost like a religious indoctrination. Because you've had to spend so long memorizing the details, and you've never had any time to think about the concepts, that you've never actually stopped and thought, is there something missing from these models? And one crucial feature of these models is that the vast, vast majority of the models which these people spend their time looking at contain no inequality. They contain no distribution. They are what we call representative agent models. So they look at the total of the economy, the aggregate or the average. And of course, when you look at the whole economy total, you're not looking at the distribution. There is no distribution. So these guys have spent years and years and years and years slaving over the intense memorization of algebraically complicated models that have no inequality and no distribution. And by the end of that, their whole life, their whole skill set, their whole career is predicated on the unbelievably intense memorization of these models with no inequality in them. See what I'm saying? So they are unbelievably attached to these models with no inequality in them. And everything you throw at them, they will instinctively think of in terms of these models with no inequality in them. It's like an indoctrination, because you've studied for years and years and years and years and years, memorized and memorized, exams and exams, tinkering, algebra, never any inequality in any of the models, right? So it's deeply embedded into them not to think in the economy in terms of inequality and in terms of distribution. It's like baked into their veins. And also, if inequality were to be important, that would essentially mean that they fucking wasted 10 years of their life and hundreds of thousands of pounds, right? So they cannot believe that inequality is important. They cannot. And I think the great example of this, I've used it a couple of times before, is when I asked a professor at university at Oxford, why do you think people spent so little money after 2008? And he said, we're not sure, but we think it's because of an exogenous shock to consumption savings preferences. That is a technical modeling term, meaning this particular parameter in people's brains changed and they stopped spending money. And it's totally nonsense to use that as an explanation for the real world. But he's so inculcated, he's so deeply bred into his blood, these models, he cannot think about the world in any way other than through these models. And it's important to understand that this is the training that all economists get. And with regards to traders, you can be a trader with an undergrad, but if you want to be really influential in policy or in government, then you need to get a PhD, basically. So these guys are in 3-year undergrad, 1 or 2 year masters, another 4 or 5 years PhD. So they've been they've really worked these models for a long time, right? It's really a massive part of who they are. So they simply do not ever think of the world in terms of inequality. And that explains why amazing things happen, like the government gives £700 billion out and no one asks who gets it. Because if you don't care about inequality, you don't care who gets it. You know somebody got it, but you don't care who, because you're just thinking about the total, right? You're not worried about the distribution. You're not worried about inequality. And this leads to exactly the kind of thing that I mentioned in the video about Jeremy Hunt and black swans. Because if there was a structural worsening problem of inequality in the economy, and you had been trained for 10 years to never look at inequality, what you would see is everything's fine, but we keep getting bad outcomes. It's exactly like if you had cancer, but you went to a doctor who didn't believe in the existence of cancer. He'd be like, there's nothing wrong with you, but bad things keep happening to you. You're just unlucky. Just keep waiting, keep eating healthy, keep exercising, and you're going to be fine. And this is the world that we're in. It comes from the state of economics, which is economics is taught to people with no mention of inequality and no understanding of inequality. And then you add this extra layer on top of it, which is if you are able to come to the understanding that inequality is deeply important in our economy and is destroying our economy, you can go and work in a skyscraper over there and make £2 million a year. So once you understand that this is the system that we've made, we've developed a system which intensely trains economists to ignore inequality and then massively rewards anyone who understands the importance of inequality under the condition that they leave the public sphere and don't speak publicly, it becomes basically obvious that we won't fix this problem, right? I mean, how much money have I personally forfeited to leave that job and do this channel? It will be £10 million. How many people are going to be willing to do that? Not many people, right? So it is basically inevitable that all of the economics information that goes to the government, that comes out on the news, that goes to ordinary people is substandard. Almost all of it. Because if it wasn't substandard, why are they telling you? Why are they telling you? Why are they giving up millions of pounds to tell you? Do you know what I'm saying? So then, I think the end result is that in government, you get a set of people who, what is really happening is a combination of stupidity and greed, which is these economists are not well trained to understand the problem, but they're fucking well paid to do whatever the fuck they're doing. You know, Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt, Boris Johnson, these guys will make a fortune, you know. These guys will make a ton of money. Doesn't matter if they fix the problem. And the economists who advise them, okay, they're not going to be multi-millionaires. They're going to make hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. They're going to be comfortable. Doesn't matter if their advice is wrong. And anyone who does understand can get paid a ton of money over there. So I think really what is really happening is the system is quite rotten at the core in a way that is itself a manifestation of inequality, which is that why would the general public get good economists when the rich are going to pay good economists £2 million a year to work for them? You see what I'm saying? It's not, inequality doesn't just mean you don't get a house. It also means the government cannot afford the best people in many cases. When you add on to that a terrible education system with economics and a massive outside incentive for anyone good to leave, it becomes inevitable. But I think the key thing that is missing is that even not paying that much, the government could attract people like me if it was able to identify good economists. But I think it's relevant that someone like me can walk into Citibank and be famous within 2 years. Whereas I can try and give the information away for free on the internet. And okay, we're growing now, but I'm nowhere near as famous as I was at Citibank. And that is because the public sphere, media, government, is very, very bad at identifying good people. You know, we've got a video about June 2020 saying there's going to be a massive increase in inequality, house prices, stock prices, inflation, collapsing quality of living. You know what I mean? That, we should be famous on that, right? Because that's an amazingly good prediction from the start. It's massively good evidence from somebody with a massive track record of good predictions. It's massively good evidence that I understand this crisis better than the guys in government. But the problem is, government is not designed to go and get good people and make them run the country. Nor is the media. You know, the problem is, these institutions that are supposed to run the country, the people who are in them are not incentivized to do good economics. The people in government are trying to win elections. In many cases, they're almost trying to rob you because they literally are the super rich. The people in the media are just trying to make professional-looking TV shows. They don't give a fuck whether that analysis is good or bad, right? They don't put me on there because they know I look unprofessional. It's as simple as that. Yeah, they don't give, okay, do they give a fuck that my analysis is actually right? Who gives a fuck? Nobody in TV cares about right analysis. All they want is it to look good, right? So the problem is, you know, all of these institutions, they're not incentivized to find good people and to do good things in most cases. They're just big bureaucracies with their own incentivizations, and everyone is trying to build their own careers, you know. So it goes a lot deeper than simply rich people in government who don't give a fuck. There is a problem of our economic institutions are intellectually bankrupt. And that sounds extreme, but listen, I've got a degree from LSE, I've got a degree from Oxford, I've been in think tanks, I've been in the city, I've been in economics for 18 years now, in many different spaces. My honest opinion is that economics is intellectually bankrupt as a discipline. That most of what they do is a complete waste of time. Most of these guys, it would be better off if we just sent them out of the country and started again. Because they are absolutely tied to a set of models that have no distribution in them, keep predicting things will get better, things keep getting worse, and they will never figure it out. They will never figure it out because it is in their blood to not consider the distribution. Add to that, they're getting fucking paid for it. They're not the guys getting hurt. I always remember when I was at Oxford, in my mid-year review, in this fucking castle, and these guys saying, you know, what do you think of the course? And I'm saying, it's shit. And they're saying, well, what do you mean? I said, you're not talking about anything that's fucking happening. I'm talking about the economy is in a disaster. And they said to me, what do you mean? The economy's getting better. But for these guys, it fucking is. And for these guys, the economy has been getting better for 20 years. And they will be saying the same thing in 20 years when the country's flooded in poverty. Because for them, it will get better. For them, it will get better. So I think it has to come from the people. It has to come from the people. It has to come from a burning desire and an unflinching demand. Do something about the wealth distribution or we will never vote for you, or we will never accept it. We will fight you until you give us that thing. It has to come from that because the economists are not going to do it for us. It has to come from the people. And if we get enough popular demand, then we can start to challenge the economists. But it has to come from the people because the economists are fucking paid. They are fucking paid. They're fucking bought and sold and they don't give a shit. And that is why the government doesn't tax rich people. So we have to make them do it. We have to make them do it. Housing could be so much more affordable, wages could be so much higher, and we could have so many more options in how we live our lives. Some of them put a lot of money into paying economists and think tanks to tell you that inequality is important for the economy. That is not true.